Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. We're going to be speaking about warm-up sets. Now this is something that I see a lot of people get wrong, and hopefully this video serves as a guide for you to improve the efficiency of your warm-up sets and improve the quality of your workouts as a consequence. So without further ado, let us begin. Now, what exactly is a warm up set used for? And what is the utility of performing a warm up set? Now, that's a question that a lot of you might have because a lot of us do perform certain movements that can be classified as a warm up before we perform our workouts at the gym. So, we may do a few movements that stimulate blood flow to our joints and muscles. Maybe we walked to the gym, so our core temperature is already at a decent level and we're feeling warm and ready to perform exercise. So, why then should we perform warm up sets for all the exercises that we perform at the gym? That's a good question. Well, a warm up serves several different purposes. So, number one, yes, it does increase the core temperature of your body and gets you warmed up, and it stimulates blood flow to the different muscles and the tissues and joints, and it helps reduce the risk of injury. But it also helps prepare you, and it helps your nervous system prepare itself to coordinate all the muscles in a way that is specific to the physical activity that you plan on engaging in. So, when you perform your workout, the exercises that you perform as a part of your workout, we must tailor our warm ups to be specific to our workouts. So, we just perform the same exercises but at a lower intensity with lighter loads and for fewer reps. And this acts as practice. So, your warm up sets are basically like a rehearsal, they are practice sets which help you build up to your working set, and by virtue of that you can collect feedback from your warm up sets and use that and make those adjustments so that your working sets are more efficient. So what do I mean by collect feedback? Now, take an example of an exercise. Let's say a dumbbell bench press. Almost everyone performs that, right? So you would have noticed that the very first set, or rather, even the very first repetition, never feels just right. It's very rare that you pick up the dumbbells, lie back on the bench, and everything just feels perfect, right? There's always some adjustment that can be made, some improvement that can be made. Maybe it's the way you sat back on the bench. Maybe it's how you gripped the dumbbells, where you gripped the dumbbells. Maybe it is the position on which you landed on the bench. Maybe you had to adjust your body slightly to the left or the right. So there are so many different variables involved in the execution of an exercise. And performing warm up sets allows us to fine tune all of these variables and make sure that when we do perform our working set, we have a pretty solid grasp of what we need to correct so that all of our focus goes into performing the exercise and not these little minor adjustments that can hinder our performance. Even if it is by a tiny bit, over the long run, it does add up. So, that is the true purpose, or rather, that is the full purpose of performing a warm up set. Now, since we have a basic understanding of why we need to perform warm up sets that are specific to our exercises, let's talk about some very common mistakes that I see people make while they're warming up. So, the first and the most common mistake is performing way too many repetitions. So, let's take that same example of the dumbbell bench press. Let's say that your working weight for the day is 30 kilos. So, the 30-kilo dumbbells is going to be, those are going to be your first working set, let's say. So, a lot of the times, people pick up maybe the 20 kg dumbbells and they perform about 10 or 12 repetitions with that. And then on the next set, they'll pick up the 25s and they'll perform another 10 or 12 reps. And finally, on their third set, they go for the 30 kilos and they end up performing maybe the same number of repetitions or a little lower than that 10, 12 rep range mark. Now, again, these are just numbers I'm throwing out. That's just an example. But you get the idea. Now, do you see the issue with that? Our warm up sets are meant to improve our performance on the working set. So, the last thing you want to do is overdo your effort on the warm up set and end up fatiguing yourself such that your performance on the working set is affected. So, ideally, you don't need more than 3 or 5 repetitions on your warm up sets. And that is what you should aim for. You have to treat your warm up sets with the same level of respect that you would your working sets. And by that, I mean you need to perform them with the same level of execution as you would your working set. But the number of repetitions that you perform should ideally not be more than 5. Now, why is it 3 to 5 repetitions? Well, as I mentioned earlier, one repetition, or rather the first repetition, will never feel okay. So there's always some adjustment that you can make. So you perform another repetition by incorporating whatever adjustments you need to. And on your third repetition, you try to replicate the same that you did on the second rep. And if required, you do a couple of more repetitions just to get the blood flowing a little bit. And again, this will depend on how close you are to your working weight. So if your working weight is 30 kilos, you can perform about 5 repetitions with 15 kgs and maybe 3 repetitions with the 20 or 25 kilo dumbbells. That is given that you are going to perform somewhere between 10 to 15 comfortable reps with the 30 kg dumbbells. So that way, you're not going to be tiring yourself out, and you're also going to get a decent rehearsal and a decent amount of practice for that working set. Now, on a related note, another mistake I see people make with their working sets is not performing the heaviest weight that they can safely handle on their very first working set. Instead, they perform working sets with the loads that they should have used for their warm up sets. So, going back to the previous example, like I mentioned, if someone has selected 30 kilos as their working weight, then they need to build up to that 30 kilos by warming up with lighter loads, progressively increasing them until they reach the 30 kgs. And that is going to be their very first working set. But instead, what a lot of people do is they end up performing many reps with the lighter weights and they consider them to be working sets, when in fact they end up being neither a warm up nor a proper working set. So that just ends up leaving you understimulated, and you end up wasting a lot of time in the gym by doing that. So, I'm going to share with you some warm up protocols that you can follow, and I'll give you a picture of exactly how you can warm up for your exercises. And I'm going to use that same example of the dumbbell bench press. Okay. So, how should you actually go about performing your warm ups? And what weight should you select for your warm up sets? And how many sets do you need to perform before you reach your working set? I'll get to that. But this is the strategy that I recommend. So, you decide your working weight for the day, and depending on the exercise, you perform anywhere between 1 to 3 warm up sets, good warm up sets. Now, you can do a few more as well, depending on the exercise and how you're feeling. But my recommendation would be at least 1 to 3 good warm up sets. So, let's say you've selected the 30 kgs as your working weight. The first warm up set is going to be performed with about 30% of your working weight. The second warm up set will be performed with about 50% of your working weight. And the third warm up set, will be performed with about 70 to 80% of your working weight. And on the first and second warm up sets, you can perform about 3 to 5 repetitions. And on the last warm up set, I would recommend limiting the repetitions to 3, because it's a little close to your working weight, and we don't want to create any unnecessary fatigue before we actually start performing our working sets. So that you can apply to pretty much all your exercises. Now, there are certain exercises for which you may not need as many warm up sets. Maybe just 1 or 2 sets will suffice. So, think about exercises that are relatively easier to execute and where you won't be using a lot of weight. So, maybe think of some machine based exercises, for example, or something like a cable tricep push down or a dumbbell curl, right? And while you may be thinking that I can get away with not performing warm up sets on these exercises, right? That may be true, but I would still recommend performing at least one good quality warm up set with that same 3 to 5 repetitions. Because no matter how easy the exercise may appear in terms of execution, there is always something that we can adjust and improve, which is going to improve the quality of our working sets. Now, that covers the first warm up strategy, which will apply to most of your exercises. Now, there is another strategy that you can use, and this one is specifically for the exercises on which you will be lifting a lot of weight. So, maybe think of something like a leg press, for example. So, let's say that you have selected 250 kilos as your working weight for your leg press, and you're going to perform that for about 10 to 15 repetitions. Now, you can apply the same warm up strategy that we had discussed earlier. So, the 30%, 50%, 70%, building up to your 250 kilos. And then you can perform one repetition with your 250 kilos itself, so with the working weight, and that is a warm up. And then you can perform one repetition with, let's say, 280 or 300 kilos. Now, you might be thinking, wait, isn't that heavier than my working set? So, how is it a warm up? Good question. You only have to perform one repetition, and that is not going to fatigue you. Of course, you can, you will have to take a little time, maybe a minute or two after that last warm up set, the heavy one, before you start performing your actual working set. But reason why we're doing this is because we want to create some neural adaptations. So we want to prepare our nervous system for lifting very heavy load. So by performing one repetition with a weight that is heavier than our working weight, we will successfully create those adaptations and really prepare our body to lift a lot of weight. So the working weight is actually going to feel lighter than it would if we had not performed that really heavy set or that really heavy repetition before starting a working set. So that is another strategy that you can apply. So that covers pretty much everything that I had to discuss with you about warm ups and the different warm up strategies that you can use. And I hope you have some more clarity now on why you should warm up and how exactly you should go about performing your warm up sets in the gym. And I hope you found it helpful. And I hope it will help you improve the quality of your workouts and make some really good gains. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.